Hollywood is not really there to entertain you. Like, that's great that that happens, but propaganda is something that is important to all civilizations.
People tried to warn us that Larenz Tate was becoming Hollywood's perfect propaganda weapon. Larenz Tate had everything. Then he refused to play their game.
I don't think that I'm underrated. I think I'm undervalued in Hollywood. And I think a lot of Black folks are undervalued, who put in the work, who put in the time.
What they did to him was so calculated that it took decades to see the pattern.
And you become a bit of a propaganda arm for the government. And in turn, they don't f with you.
This is the story they don't want you to know. In 1993, 17-year-old Larenz Tate delivered cinema's most chilling performance as O-Dog in Menace to Society. The role was so authentic that it immediately trapped him in Hollywood's typecast prison. What should have launched superstardom instead became his curse.
And if you want to be able to make movies about certain subjects, you have to be willing to work with some people that, you know, it'd be nice if you made it so that this is what we're trying to accomplish.
Hollywood found their perfect propaganda weapon. Here was a Black actor who could make violence look authentic without threatening white audiences. He wasn't challenging their worldview about young Black men being dangerous. He was confirming it with every role. The trap became obvious when Tate tried to break free. The Inkwell in 1994 showed him playing Drew, a middle-class teenager. Suddenly, critics who had praised his natural talent as O-Dog found his performance forced. Reviews said he seemed uncomfortable playing an educated character. The message was clear: stay in your assigned box. South Central should have been his escape. The Fox series tackled real social issues with Tate playing Andre, a complex character showing both strength and vulnerability. The show received positive reviews and strong ratings from Black audiences hungry for authentic representation. But it lasted exactly one season before Fox canceled it, citing budget constraints.
We work twice as hard to get, twice as less as our counterparts, right? And that being said, it is the same way. We're not valued the way I believe we're supposed to be valued.
Meanwhile, white-led shows dealing with far less compelling social issues were getting renewed season after season. The cancellation sent a clear message. Hollywood would tolerate Black actors as long as they stuck to playing criminals and villains. But any attempt to address real social issues would be shut down quickly. By 1995's Dead Presidents, Tate was fighting industry expectations. Critics noted he proved he could play sympathetic characters. The fact this was proof rather than expectation revealed how narrow Hollywood's perception had become. Each excellent performance in limited commercial successes created a cycle. Fewer mainstream opportunities, more independent films, smaller budgets, less visibility. Love Jones in 1997 should have changed everything. Playing Darius Lovehall, Tate proved he could be a romantic leading man with the same authenticity he'd brought to street characters. The film became a cultural phenomenon, positioning him for A-list stardom. Instead, it marked the beginning of Hollywood's sophisticated campaign to contain his influence.
And so, like, at that point, after they saw the success of it, which is the film that you're like, all right, now I know what my worth is. Here's what I'm negotiating for this film.
It's probably Love Jones.
Okay.
Because at that time, I had some success with the other films. And I knew that I could have some more negotiating power.
For the first time, Tate had real leverage. He could make demands about roles, compensation, and stories he wanted to tell. This is when Hollywood's real resistance began. They were fine with him being a talented character actor in smaller films, but the moment he started acting like a leading man with star power, the machine turned against him. The success gave Tate something he'd never had before: the ability to negotiate. When his agents approached New Line Cinema about increasing his fee for future projects, citing the cultural impact and profitability of Love Jones, they hit a wall. Studio president Mike DeLuca told them Tate was pricing himself out of the market. This wasn't about his actual market value. Love Jones had been made for a modest budget and generated significant profits while becoming a cultural touchstone that people still quote today. The film proved that sophisticated black romantic stories could find audiences and make money. But Hollywood had a different calculation in mind.
He was like, listen, I don't think that's not what we're gonna do. And I was like, nah, I think I deserve it. You know what I mean? I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna do the work, and we'll be okay. And he was like, honestly, I would love to give you that number, but we just don't. It's just not in the budget.
While white actors with similar or lesser track records were routinely getting $10 to $20 million deals for romantic comedies, black actors who had proven their worth were being told that paying them fairly would somehow break the budget. The message was clear. You can have cultural impact and critical acclaim, but don't expect to be compensated like your white counterparts. The sabotage was subtle but devastatingly effective. Instead of capitalizing on Love Jones by offering Tate similar romantic leading roles in bigger budget films, Hollywood offered him supporting parts in white-led movies or leads in smaller black films with limited marketing budgets. When he held out for better opportunities, industry whispers began labeling him as difficult and ungrateful. The international distribution lie became another weapon in this systematic campaign. When Tate's representatives asked for back-end participation in international sales, they were told repeatedly that black actors don't sell overseas, and that international audiences weren't interested in black romantic leads. But this narrative fell apart when Tate began traveling internationally. He discovered that Love Jones had developed passionate fan bases in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Audiences who didn't even speak English as their first language could quote Darius's poetry and understood the film's themes on a universal level. The black actors don't sell internationally story was a calculated lie designed to exclude black talent from the most lucrative revenue streams. The follow-up projects tell the story of this systematic sabotage. The Postman in 1997 gave Tate a supporting role in a big-budget Kevin Costner film. But it was such a commercial disaster that it did nothing for his career. Why Do Fools Fall in Love in 1998 allowed him to showcase his range playing Frankie Lyman, but the film received minimal marketing despite strong performances. By the early 2000s, the pattern was undeniable. Tate was being offered roles that kept him working, but prevented him from building the sustained stardom that Love Jones had promised. Each project was calibrated to showcase his talent while limiting his platform, keeping him valuable enough to studios while ensuring he never accumulated enough power to challenge the system. By the early 2000s, Hollywood had perfected their strategy for containing Larenz Tate's influence. Since they couldn't suppress his talent or deny his drawing power with audiences, they decided to weaponize it instead. His ability to bring depth and humanity to complex characters would be redirected exclusively toward villains, criminals, and morally compromised figures.
So at the time, I'm trying to think, as you're coming up, nobody's putting you onto the game? Is anybody aware of this, or is this?
I'm sure they are, but a lot of the information is not being passed around, right? And if the information is being passed around, we don't know how to utilize it. And I think that was part of one of the things when you say the mistakes.
This isolation was intentional and strategic. While Tate was being channeled into villain roles, other black actors were facing similar limitations. But there was no mechanism for them to share information or coordinate resistance. Each actor was forced to navigate the exploitative system alone, making the same mistakes and accepting the same lowball deals. The evidence was clear in Tate's filmography from this period. A Man Apart, in 2003, cast him as a drug enforcement officer who goes rogue. Crash in 2004 had him playing a carjacker who articulates intelligent critiques of racial profiling while simultaneously embodying the stereotypes he's criticizing. Waist Deep in 2006 put him in yet another criminal role. Each performance showcased Tate's exceptional acting ability while reinforcing harmful narratives about black men being inherently violent or criminal. The roles were so well executed that audiences found themselves sympathizing with these characters. But the overall effect was to normalize the idea that black masculinity was inevitably connected to criminality. The most revealing example was Crash, the Academy Award-winning film about racial tensions in Los Angeles. Tate played Peter Waters, a carjacker who delivers articulate monologues about systemic racism and police brutality. On the surface, it seemed like a role that would allow him to address real social issues, but the character's criminal behavior undermined every intelligent point he made. It was a perfect metaphor for Tate's career during this period, using his intelligence and charisma to validate a system that was exploiting him, making brilliant arguments about racial inequality while playing a character who confirmed white audiences' worst fears about young black men.
You don't care how people feel about the ritual. It's about, does following the ritual work?
Yeah.
And so you can fool yourself into thinking there isn't one, but the evidence will be clear.
The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Every time Tate delivered an exceptional performance as a villain or criminal, it led to more offers for similar roles rather than opportunities to play heroes or positive characters. His talent was being used against him, creating a cycle where his greatest strength became his biggest limitation. Television became another avenue for this containment strategy. His role as Bart Black Sean Johnston on FX's Rescue Me was typical of how the villain pipeline operated. He played a firefighter with a criminal past, a character who could be heroic in some episodes, but whose background always made him potentially dangerous. It was sophisticated typecasting, giving actors complex characters while ensuring those characters still reinforced limiting stereotypes. Even when black men tried to do good, the message suggested their criminal nature was always lurking just beneath the surface. The financial implications were devastating for Tate's long-term prospects. Villain roles rarely led to back-end participation, merchandising opportunities, or franchise-building deals that created generational wealth. While action heroes and romantic leads could build multimedia empires, villains were disposable, memorable for a moment, then forgotten. Each role paid enough to keep Tate working, but never enough to build the financial independence that would have allowed him to be selective about projects or develop his own content that challenged the limiting narratives he was being forced to perpetuate. When Netflix and other streaming platforms began disrupting traditional Hollywood in the 2010s, the promise was democratization. Content creators would have direct access to global audiences. Merit would be rewarded regardless of traditional gatekeepers' biases, and diverse stories would find their natural markets without interference. For Larenz Tate, streaming seemed to represent a genuine opportunity to escape the typecasting and financial exploitation that had defined his career. Here were platforms that needed enormous amounts of content and claimed to value creative authenticity over traditional market calculations.
We would negotiate points, we was really banking on the box office success. And once the switch happened, we didn't really understand, no one understood what that would look like and how these deals would be put together.
The transition to streaming eliminated the transparent financial metrics that had allowed actors to negotiate fair compensation. Box office numbers were public information. If a film made $50 million, actors could point to specific figures when negotiating their next deals. But streaming platforms guard their viewership data like state secrets, making it impossible for actors to prove their value. This opacity served exactly the same function as the old international distribution lie, but in a more sophisticated form. Platforms could claim any level of success they wanted for any content, then use those manufactured metrics to justify whatever compensation they felt like offering. When Tate tried to negotiate better terms based on the obvious popularity of his streaming content, social media engagement, fan response, cultural impact, he was told that internal analytics showed different results than what he was observing in public reaction. The algorithmic recommendation systems became another tool for maintaining control. Shows and films starring white actors were more likely to be recommended, received better promotional placement, and were kept in catalogs longer. Black-led content was often buried in specialized categories or removed after shorter periods, regardless of actual popularity.
That's what makes information so powerful is, you don't care how people feel about the ritual. It's about, does following the ritual work?
Yeah.
And so you can fool yourself into thinking there isn't one.
The streaming ritual was more subtle than traditional Hollywood's obvious power plays, but just as effective. Actors were expected to express constant gratitude for streaming opportunities, accept non-negotiable contract terms, and avoid public criticism of platforms in exchange for continued work. Those who complained were quickly labeled as difficult. Tate's experience with House of Lies illustrated this dynamic perfectly. Playing Malcolm Khan on the critically acclaimed Showtime series, he delivered compelling performances for 5 seasons. Despite the show's success and his character's popularity with viewers, Tate remained in a supporting role throughout its run. When the series ended, there was no discussion of spin-offs or starring vehicles for his character. The false promises of streaming diversity became apparent as platforms matured. Initial commitments to diverse content were revealed to be marketing strategies rather than genuine policy changes. Once platforms had built their subscriber bases, diverse content was quietly deprioritized in favor of projects featuring established stars who could guarantee international licensing deals. Data-driven justification for discrimination became particularly sophisticated in the streaming era. Platforms could point to viewing analytics, engagement metrics, and algorithmic recommendations to support any decision about content or talent. The numbers might have been manufactured or manipulated, but they provided perfect cover for implementing the same discriminatory practices that had always governed Hollywood. When Larenz Tate joined Power as Councilman Rashad Tate in 2017, it seemed like the breakthrough he'd been fighting for his entire career. Here was a complex, intelligent character on a hit television series with massive cultural impact. After decades of being undervalued, Tate finally had a role that seemed worthy of his talents. But examining Councilman Rashad Tate through the lens of Cat Williams's warnings reveals something far more troubling. This wasn't Tate's breakthrough. It was the most sophisticated trap Hollywood had ever set for him, using his intelligence and charisma to reinforce every negative stereotype about Black political leadership.
Power, Ghost, season 3, that's out, that's covered out. It's going to be an incredible season.
Councilman Rashad Tate.
Yes, Councilman Rashad Tate. There's a connection. And, can't give too much away, but I can say that we've elevated some things.
Listen to how Tate describes his character. Elevated some things, and references to shenanigans and backdoor deals. Even he understands that Rashad Tate represents corruption, manipulation, and the abuse of political power for personal gain. But here's what makes this so insidious. Tate brings such authenticity to the role that audiences find themselves sympathizing with a character who embodies every negative stereotype about Black politicians. Councilman Rashad Tate is brilliant, charismatic, politically savvy, and completely corrupt. He uses his intelligence to manipulate the political system for personal advancement, often at the expense of the communities he's supposed to serve. for an actor who had spent decades being undervalued. The role offered something seductive, playing someone with real power, even if that power was ultimately destructive. But the character serves a much more sinister function in cultural conversations about Black political leadership. At a time when discussions about systemic racism and political representation were gaining mainstream attention, Power was presenting audiences with a Black politician who confirmed every negative assumption about African American political leaders being inherently corrupt and untrustworthy. This is exactly the sophisticated propaganda mechanism that Cat Williams identified. Give a talented Black actor a high-profile role that showcases his abilities and provides financial stability, but ensure that role ultimately serves narratives that justify continued marginalization of Black communities and undermine confidence in Black leadership.
We're definitely gonna, see Councilman Tate up to his shenanigans. Gotta do that. It wouldn't be. There's gonna be some
right.
Shenanigans.
yeah, and some backdoor deals and some nonsense going on. And no, I'm excited about it.
Every intelligent decision Rashad Tate made was undermined by personal corruption. Every moment of genuine community concern was revealed to be calculated manipulation. Every display of political skill was tainted by criminal associations. The message couldn't have been clearer. This is what happens when Black men get political power. They inevitably abuse it. The financial arrangement for Tate's power role illustrated another aspect of Hollywood's control system. Initially, he was paid what he describes as peanuts, so little that after taxes and fees, he barely had anything left. His agents advised against taking the role, but Tate recognized the potential and negotiated his own deal. When Power became a massive hit, Tate's compensation improved dramatically. But this success came with strings attached. As one of the few Black actors with a starring role on a hit premium series, he became an unwitting spokesperson for the idea that streaming platforms were providing unprecedented opportunities for Black talent. His success was routinely cited as evidence that systemic barriers were breaking down, while the vast majority of Black actors continued to face the same limitations. Their struggles were now dismissed because, look at Larenz Tate on Power. The system works for those who work hard. The international success of Power also vindicated Tate's complaints about the Black actors don't sell internationally lie. The show became a global phenomenon, proving that the narrative had always been false. But by then, Tate was in his 40s, and the prime years of his career had been spent fighting battles based on fabricated market research. Looking back at Larenz Tate's career through the framework of Cat Williams' warnings about Hollywood's systematic control mechanisms, every pattern becomes undeniable. The typecast prison after menace to society. The systematic undervaluation, despite critical acclaim. The villain pipeline that weaponized his talent. The streaming revolution that promised change but delivered more sophisticated exploitation. The power role that showcased his abilities while reinforcing harmful stereotypes. None of this was accidental. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign to control one of the most talented actors of his generation, using his own abilities against him while making millions from his work.
So 20 years ago, I knew that transgenders was going to be a thing. It wasn't because I was a prophet. It's just I had gotten so much information that I understood that things are secular.
Cat Williams wasn't predicting the future when he warned about Hollywood's systematic control mechanisms. He was analyzing patterns that were already visible to anyone willing to see them. Larenz Tate's career represents a perfect case study of how these patterns operate over decades, slowly grinding down even the most talented artists. The ritual for Tate wasn't dress-wearing. It was accepting systematic undervaluation. Every time he took a role that paid less than his market worth, every time he played a villain instead of holding out for hero roles, every time he accepted supporting parts instead of demanding leading man opportunities, He was participating in the system that devalued him.
And I think a lot of Black folks are undervalued, who put in the work, who put in the time, who are certainly undervalued.
This statement captures the essence of what Cat Williams was trying to warn us about. The systematic undervaluation isn't accidental. It's the entire point of Hollywood's control system. Keep Black talent working just enough to prevent them from leaving the industry entirely, but never give them enough power or compensation to become truly independent. The broader implications extend far beyond individual careers. When audiences consistently see talented Black actors playing villains, criminals, and corrupt officials, it reinforces subconscious biases about Black people in general. When Black romantic leads are rare and Black action heroes even rarer, it limits how Black masculinity is perceived in popular culture. The international distribution lie reveals another layer of deception. For decades, Hollywood convinced Black actors that their work had no value in global markets, using this false narrative to exclude them from lucrative revenue streams. Meanwhile, films and television shows starring Black actors were generating enormous profits overseas, with those profits flowing entirely to white-owned studios. The streaming revolution promised to democratize content creation, but instead created new mechanisms for implementing old forms of control. Algorithmic systems that claim to be neutral perpetuate existing biases. Data analytics that promise transparency are actually more opaque than traditional reporting. Diversity initiatives that appear progressive are often marketing strategies designed to deflect criticism. The tragedy of Larenz Tate's career isn't that he failed to achieve success. He's worked consistently for over 3 decades, appeared in acclaimed films and shows, and built a substantial fan base. The tragedy is what he could have accomplished if the system had allowed him to reach his full potential. But there's also hope in his story. His decision to negotiate his power contract directly shows that resistance is possible. His public statements about systematic undervaluation help educate other Black actors about industry practices. His work with his brothers through their production company represents an attempt to build independent alternatives. The evidence is clear in Larenz Tate's career trajectory. A supremely talented actor who should have been one of the biggest stars of his generation, reduced to supporting roles and villain parts through systematic industry discrimination. The warning signs were always there. Cat Williams just had the courage to point them out. We should have listened. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.